All right. Hey, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Freedom Papers. You're going to get learnt today. We are back, and I've got Connor Clegg. Hi, Connor.
Hey, everybody. Great to be back.
Can you, in case anybody's new to this, what do you do here?
Yeah, I produce Charlie Kirk's radio show and podcasts, and I help him say things and think things, I guess. I don't know.
Wow, great description. That's quite the job. Quite
Yeah.
the job, if you ask me. But on the side and behind the scenes, Connor's a smarty, so I like to have him on to Freedom Papers. You guys, welcome back. First of all, thank you so much for following along. Remember to follow at Freedom Papers Podcast on Instagram, where we post all the kind of behind-the-scenes fun and highlights of me. I put them to things like Billy Joel, We Didn't Start the Fire, because it's history-related, all the things. And remember to get your copies, of course, of the founding documents, the Federalist Papers, and the Anti-Federalist Papers. Now, today, Connor, we're talking about tax. Let's talk about tax, baby.
Let's talk about tax, baby.
Let's talk about you and me, and by that we mean us and the government.
That's right.
They are overtaxing us, and it's ridiculous. First of all, let's do a little recap, Connor, because we're so far into it. Guys, I feel like we just started, but no, we are on Federalist Paper number 12 today.
Wow.
Time flies when you're having a blast. Let's do a little recap. Remember, you guys, part 1, which is what we're in right now, the first half of the 85 Federalist Papers, or not half, but the first section of it, of the 2, is about why we need to be a union instead of a bunch of separated small states or separated small confederacies. And the first paper, of course, is kind of like a general overview saying, as Publius, these 3 guys are about to explain to the American people why we should be a union, and what the structure of our government would look like if we ratified the U.S. Constitution. Papers 2 through 5, those are about the dangers from foreign forces and why we would be stronger together as a union. The 6 through 7 were about dangers from domestic forces and causes of domestic conflict. A little sketchy there. Those were some good ones. And then 8 was about the consequences of if we don't listen to the previous papers and we end up in domestic conflict. Numbers 9 and 10 were about safeguarding us from domestic faction and insurrection. So when you have 2 groups that are pretty hostile towards each other on American soil, what's going to happen if we start fighting, and how can we prevent hostilities? And then 11 was all about the Navy. And it kind of transitioned us into what we're going to talk about today, because it was saying that we need to establish a Navy so that we can have strong commerce, protect our trade, and start really growing our economy, because the world powers are getting a little jealous. We are rising on the world stage in 1787, and we need a way to protect ourselves, especially with the Atlantic Ocean, all the water and the rivers that are in the great country that was going to become the United States of America under the U.S. Constitution. So, leading from that concept of let's build the Navy to protect our commerce, now we're talking about tax and its relation to commerce, right, and how we grow our economy and how we keep some revenue for the government. Do we? Should we? How are they going to do it? Is it possible to even tax people on certain things? And honestly, it hurts my heart to read this paper, because we've come so far from the discussion that's happening in Federalist Paper number 12.
Amen.
So with that being said, paper number 12 is titled The Utility of the Union in Respect to Revenue. It was written by Hamilton. And let's get right into it. Connor, do you have any initial thoughts before we get into it?
My initial thoughts whenever I was reading this were that I don't think Hamilton could have ever imagined that we would be a nation so in debt as we are right now, and so committed to taxation as a means by which to control people and their actions and their motives and intentions. And I get why he had to defend his position, because people are naturally scared of government taxation and authority. Like we say all the time, I don't think he ever could have imagined that it would go so far, but here we are.
Yeah, and this is where a lot of people have asked me, like, do you have a hard time doing Freedom Papers as a more Federalist person when it's more focused on the Federalists? And I say, well, we talk about what the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists say, and I still would have voted to ratify the Constitution if I was given that opportunity to vote back in 1787 and back in that era. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to see the state of our government right now when we're so deep in debt. You have so many people that are using the federal government to either oppress people or get rich and benefit themselves. And this is what the Anti-Federalists had warned about. They were worried that creating a Washington, D.C. federal government, that would create opportunities for tyranny, for oppression, and for monarchy, because at the time they just wanted to avoid a King George repeat, which they had just fought a Revolutionary War to get out of. So it's hard to see the state of the government now, to see the state of, revenue and commerce, and see the government so involved in it, and then to read this paper. So I ask you guys right now, really make sure you get a mindset of, okay, this was what they were talking about at the time, given the factors, and obviously things have changed. But in this paper, I did a lot of research, Connor, so we could talk about what happened with the Civil War when they did introduce the income tax and how that was just to finance the war.
Right.
And then it ended. But then in 1913, that's when they brought in a permanent income tax. And it started as a means to fund World War I. But it never left.
Right.
And then it just got stacked and stacked and stacked. And now you have Americans paying about 40% of their income in taxes, which obviously I don't think the Federalists or Anti-Federalists had in mind.
No,
Did you?
not at all. Not at all.
Jesus. Okay, so with that being said, let's get on into it. This is a feel-good paragraph that I really liked. It was, very American spirit. Publius says, "The prosperity of commerce is now perceived and acknowledged by all enlightened statesmen to be the most useful as well as the most productive source of national wealth, and has accordingly become a primary object of their political cares. By multiplying the means of gratification, by promoting the introduction and circulation of the precious metals, those darling objects of human avarice and enterprise, it serves to vivify and invigorate all the channels of industry, and to make them flow with greater activity and copiousness. The assiduous merchant, the laborious husbandman, the active mechanic, and the industrious manufacturer. All orders of men look forward with eager expectation and growing alacrity to this pleasing reward of their toils." And to me, that was very, working man, average America. But it not only that, but it said all kinds of guys, all kinds of workers, all kinds of participants in the economy, all kinds of Americans benefit when we have a strong economy, when we participate in commerce. And not only that, but our country is stronger when we do have commerce and when we consider taxing commerce versus taxing other things. And so it was just kind of a kickoff to saying, when we succeed with our economy, the average people succeed, the merchants, the handyman, all that kind of stuff, they're going to continue to grow and we're going to benefit on a huge scale.
Right, and of course they are. And that all assumes that government is going to allow commerce to happen unencumbered by government, right? And taxation was going to be kind of the tip of the iceberg of how they would get in the way of commerce. But I think we're seeing now more than probably ever before in our history where government is interfering with commerce. They're not encouraging, they're engaging in it. And then they're also actively stopping commerce, right? Through these vaccine mandates and through, all these regulations on interstate travel. And now we're seeing states step in and they want to start, limiting the ability of one state to engage in commerce in their own state at the risk of a losing trade partnership with the other state, right? We can get into all that in more detail later, but this idea of commerce back then, obviously it's a phenomenal idea, right? We need commerce to have a strong national economy, but it's been completely and totally perverted. Everyone knows that this is true, but the Anti-Federalists might have been onto something here because they knew that it would be really, really perverted.
Yeah, and that's exactly what ended up happening.
Right.
Actually, speaking of what you said, I want to just skip to the end with what Publius finishes off with. He says, "A nation cannot long exist without revenue.
Right.
Destitute of this essential support, it must resign its independence and seek into the degraded condition of province."
Yeah.
And so really what he's saying there is, the government needs to have some sort of an amount of funds to use, whether that's to protect the people or to form an army, to do very, very basic things if they're actually going to continue the republic. And the goal of the republic is to protect the freedoms that are God-given to all of the people of America. And so you can't do that with a $0 budget, and you're going to have to find some way to get money to be brought in. Going back to the beginning of the paper with what I was mentioning, the founders, through every essay, through every paper, they looked to the countries throughout history, the republics, all the different countries that existed at the time, to see where they failed and what they were doing and what the lessons they had learned. And what they learned from Europe is that there was generational wealth that was deeply built for thousands of years into those countries. They've been around forever, those families, the legacies. There was a massive amount of wealth, and in those countries you saw a lot of taxing directly on what people owned. And the founders say, we can't do that. Right. We're a bunch of poor farmers that just fought a revolutionary war. We have no infrastructure built in this country.
They also
all
don't
of
have the capital
commerce,
to pay the taxes, right?
Yeah, it's like there's nothing that really exists, and so we have to grow. And so that argument was really, let's not tax what people have, because first of all, people don't have much, but it also goes against the American principles that we're trying to start here, that you can't just, the government can't just come in and tax things that you own. That's not the American principle that we're trying to build here. So I loved that. But it's a good point. They were like, we also just don't have things to tax right now, so we're going to have to tax commerce if we do want to build something, because we need to make this republic last. We've got to build something that will last. And really the only way to do that right now is commerce, and we have to grow in commerce. So that's really the lesson that I saw.
Well, yeah, and then the fundamental argument of the paper is that commerce is going to be more easily attained whenever we're a union, right? And I mean, I think that obviously makes sense. Like, no one should really have anything to argue with there. But yeah, it obviously makes so much more sense for the nation to be together, and then we're stronger, like we talked about last time we were on here with 11, right? Same thing goes for the economy as it does for defense, as it does for everything else.
Yeah, no, I love that, and there's definitely some good quotes in there that we'll bring in. Next that I saw, I wanted to bring this up because it kind of piqued my interest. You grew up in Texas, right?
I did.
So I grew up in upstate New York, and there's a quote from Publius that really reminded me of our upbringings because I'm sure they were a little bit different.
A little bit.
It was just a simple quote. It says, "It has been found in various countries that in proportion as commerce has flourished, land has risen in value." And then he goes into talking about when the economy is strong, the land will rise in value, the communities grow, they strengthen, the families there grow. And it was just the message that average Americans will succeed more when there is a strong economy. Yeah. And I know for me, I can personally attest to the fact that I grew up in upstate New York. We were the least friendly business or state for businesses in the country when I was growing up. We had the highest state and local tax burden in the country as well. And then when you add the federal burden, oh my goodness, it was insane. And I think California might be beating us now. But it's just, if you look at all the worst categories, we were ranked number 1 or number 2 competing with California.
And Texas was always at the other end of the spectrum, right?
Exactly.
The most business friendly, the most open, the most, inexpensive. So.
Exactly. And so for me, I'm growing up in upstate New York, and I can't afford anything. Do you want to know what? There's nobody that lives there anymore. 1 million people fled over the last 10 years because of Governor Cuomo's leadership. That was before COVID, Connor. Imagine how many people have left now. So it's because young people would look at the economy and say, I can't make it here. Yeah. I can't afford to live here because not only does the land not have value, and so it doesn't make sense for me to buy a house. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have to rent, and it's like $1,900, $2,000 to rent an apartment. Right. And so what do you know? Young people look at it and they say, this economy will not allow me to grow or my family or my community. Everything's literally crumbling and decaying because it doesn't make sense to invest in it because the land has no value. And so a lot of people move to Texas. I moved to Texas. Yeah. And I don't know about you, but what your plan looked like in your life. But for me in upstate New York, my vision of buying a home was more of like a 15-year plan. Oh, yeah. It's a long-term plan. I moved to Texas, and guess what? It was cheaper for me to buy property, and the house is an asset. Right. Because I can rent it out, I can sell it at a higher value now because it's a strong economy, it's a good place to live, it's a good place to grow, and it benefits the people. Can you talk about that for you? Like, what was it like to grow up in a place with opportunity?
Well, I mean, what it was like to grow up in a place with opportunity for me was, it was just a generally happier place. It was a cleaner place. It was a place that people actually enjoyed being. It was a place that people were proud of, is another thing, right? And I think that's sort of inherent in the nature of a Texan is to be proud of their home there. But it was exasperated to a certain extent because they were like, I can actually make it here, right? The American dream feels attainable here. The price of gas is low, and I can watch cities booming up around me, and I can see that progress, quote unquote, progress is being made in terms of making the state a better place. That also in terms of construction of roadways and just opportunity and better schools. Our school funding was really good, right? Mm-hmm. Whenever we had more people coming in, paying more property taxes, and they put it to good use, ostensibly. I will say that the influx of people into Texas, this was a shift that I saw as I started to get in later in my college years and start thinking about moving out of Texas, not necessarily because I wanted to, but for work, et cetera, et cetera. That's how I'm here in Phoenix. Mm-hmm. But I did see a lot of where this influx of folks from New York and folks from California and folks from all these other places, not Morgan particularly, but some of the crazier ones, right? But it did make Texas a worse place. It got more crowded. It got less enjoyable. Cities started building up instead of out, which lends itself to more of that renting culture. And then you saw home ownership go down. You saw the quality of schools plummet. You saw all these things happening. And it goes to show that, you can't really have a sustainable, free, open market without any sort of guardrails if you want to keep it as enjoyable as it once was and as prosperous as it once was. And I think that whenever it comes to commerce, like we talk about in this paper here, we can learn a lot of lessons from that, right? Because a free market can only be free as long as it exists in an ordered society, right? And something that we're going to see in terms of how commerce has been regulated over the years and how we've started, diving into these arguments about funding the government and taxation and deficits and monetary theory is that we have these peachy, rosy ideas of how it should be and how capitalism and the free market and the invisible hand and all these great things are actually a little bit sinister if they're not nurtured and taken care of and ordered a little bit by what some would call more, authoritarian style, right?
Yeah.
Ideas of monetary theory, et cetera.
Well, that's why when we talk about, commerce and increasing revenue and growing the economy the way the founders had intended, they really saw it. And what I see is like the most basic essence of capitalism, which was like, let the people participate in the economy and they're going to build up something that's wonderful. And now I would say the big problem we have in America is that most of the problems that we have with the economy are because there's a private-public partnership that is toxic to the average people, and it has nothing to do with capitalism.
Right.
And when we talk about capitalism, let's do a little basic lesson here.
Right.
What I loved about this, and specifically when we talk about like the Great Reset, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where they say you're not going to own anything and you're going to love it. You're not going to have a house. They tell you not to have a family, all this stuff.
You'll own nothing and be happy, right?
Exactly. I think that is so toxic because it also goes against the principles that are in this paper where the founders had said, we're going to need to tax something like commerce because we cannot tax what people own. It's not American. We're trying to build a mindset here of build something, build this country up from nothing. And it goes completely against the basic core principles of the founding of this nation to tax what people own and build themselves. And to see where we've come from that point to now where we are, it really breaks my heart. Yeah. But when we go back to like even that first paragraph that I read, it was the idea that we could really build something if we had a strong economy. And I just want to remind you guys that capitalism is truly just the average people like you and me, the people of a country being able to participate in the economy and own things, start a business, sell products, all these things. And it's not just that. It's not just, I'm going to sell Connor an egg for $2 and then he's going to give me the $2 and that exchange is capitalism.
Yeah.
It's not. Instead, it's a principle where, yes, you are allowed to do something like I could raise my chickens and have my eggs and sell them and give one to Connor and he'll give me money in exchange for that. But the government has a system of public policy that protects my ability to have a fair price on that egg, give it to Connor in exchange. He knows that it's not going to be some fake egg. You know what I mean? Like it protects the ability for us to have these rights and participate in the economy as private people. But that's really all it should be doing.
Right.
The average people should be running the economy. And that's what that is. Socialism is when in the name of the people, like the People's Republic of China, big red flag whenever they have a country named like that, it's when the government controls the economy, but in the name of the people.
Right.
And in reality, the government runs everything. They are the employer, they are the creator of all goods, they are the provider of all services, and that means the people are completely dependent on the government for all of those things. So the idea that America was built on capitalism is really the idea that it was built on economic independence for the people, and that's a really important principle for us to remember.
And I think free trade is probably a prettier word, right? For capitalism, would you say?
Oh, yeah, I like that. Economic independence,
Economic
all that
independence,
stuff.
right? National economic interests, et cetera, et cetera. You bring up this really interesting point. I wrote it down here. I thought it was one of the most harmful things that made its way into the Constitution because it's been the most abused thing, arguably, that made its way into the Constitution, right? Article 1, Section 8 of the Commerce Clause, that Congress has the ability to levy taxes, incises, debts, et cetera, in order to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and the general welfare of the United States. So,
general welfare.
The general welfare, right? Courts have taken that to mean, in 1936, I think it was U.S. versus Baker, right? That was really what set the precedent that the general welfare basically just means spinning it to do anything that Congress can say, oh, this is good for everybody, right? The reality of the situation was, and I think that Federalist 12 is the best proof of this, and I wish we had more legal scholars, quote unquote, who could stand up and say this. But whenever they said the general welfare of the United States, all that meant was Congress cannot make a law to promote the general welfare of Massachusetts alone or one state alone. The general welfare of the United States, the emphasis on this needs to be of the United States, not the general welfare, because they were simply trying to say you can't just single out one state and then go up to the legislature and then pass something, a tax that's only going to benefit that state. But instead, we see the general welfare be abused, and now all of a sudden we're saying that, the Green New Deal is constitutional inherently because it benefits the general welfare, whatever the hell that means.
I am so glad you brought that up
Yeah.
because I read something just a few days ago before I even knew we were going to film on 12, and it was them saying that healthcare for all was for the general welfare.
Right.
And they specifically quoted that, and they had it was like a meme, and it was like, when conservatives say it's not constitutional, and then they quoted that article.
Yeah.
So I was like,
Well, it's been a total
oh my
abuse
goodness.
of it.
But that's the kind of little historical stuff that I love to include in the podcast because it's such a good point. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, sure,
I
of
totally
course.
forgot. And I'm glad you brought up the core principles of taxation by the federal government because I did a little history research and I got us a little timeline.
Good.
I want to walk you guys through what the heck happened in American history where we went from debating in this paper if we should even tax people at a federal level ever, if it's the role of the federal government, to now we pay about like 40% of our income or whatever it is, a huge amount in taxes. So I looked it up, and I think Connor mentioned this. The Constitution, when written, gave Congress the power to impose taxes and levies on the public for those reasons, but the Constitution said it was up to the states to collect the tax money and then pass that money to the federal government.
Right.
That was how it was originally intended. So at the time, most of these were like a tobacco tax, an alcohol tax, excise taxes on products and goods. So they tried out some direct taxation, and we talked about this. It was basically against the American way. You should not say, oh, you own XYZ, we're going to take 15% of the value of that, or whatever it may be.
Right.
We're going to directly tax what you already own. That's wrong. It's anti-American. So they tried it and failed. It didn't work. So then what happened is the Civil War came around, and it was really the first instance, it was in 1861, the first instance that the federal government did an income tax on the people of America across the country, and they said it was to finance the Civil War. So that, again, was in 1861. And it was just for a specific purpose. And so that was kind of one argument is, should the federal government be able to tax for specific purposes, like maybe the building of a bridge? And that's a small, tiny example. But for this, it was to fund the Civil War and to make sure that we fought it for the sake of the Republic. So that happened, but it led to the creation of our favorite thing, the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service. And so what they did is they took over responsibility, and this is the big thing. At first, the Constitution gave the power to the states to collect the money and to give it to the federal government, but the creation of the IRS, when they started income tax for the Civil War in 1861, was giving the IRS now the responsibility of collecting taxes from the states. The states no longer had that power to do that.
Well, because how could you trust the states anymore after 1861, right? You can't just place the onus of the federal government's funding on the states that just seceded from the federal government. So, I mean, it makes sense.
So, it's a great example. It's like Social Security. We're like, oh, that makes sense at the time.
It makes sense
like,
at the time.
We have this problem. Now, what,
it's like,
80
crap,
years
we're stuck
later,
with
it's
it.
like, oh, we don't have any money. We don't have any more money. Like, wait, young people pay into that every single day,
Just
and they're never
because
going to see that money again?
Some asshole in South Carolina decided to leave the union. Now all of a sudden we have the IRS. It's a sick chain of events. Isn't it? Sorry, go ahead.
And look at us now.
Look
We're
at us
like,
now.
now we're investigated by the IRS
Right.
just for being conservatives.
Thanks.
Womp womp. So let's transition though. So they had the income tax, but that was just a blip because it was for that moment. But the IRS was created, and states no longer had the power to take the money from the taxes, give it to the federal government. Then the 1900s rolled along, and our FDR, our best friend, a huge fan of them at Turning Point USA, he comes around, all this stuff, but there's the progressive era, basically. And for World War I, what do you know? It's time for us to finance another war.
Right.
Because we're in a moment of crisis, time for us to give up our liberties. Sound like a familiar thing, Connor?
Right.
So we're in a World War I, time to finance it. And what do you know? The federal government in 1913 starts an income tax, and we have never looked back.
Nope.
From then on, we have had a consistent federal income tax in the United States.
Right.
So I looked into it, and it also turns out, so the corporate income tax started in 1909. Did you know that?
Yeah,
Before the individual?
Right, and that makes sense because corporations are held obviously different standards. Individuals, whenever you tax their income, let me go back.
Yeah.
With corporations, you're taxing their income because corporations are held to a certain standard in terms of how they can use those expenditures or use that income as expenditures, right? So the federal government is making the bet whenever they tax corporations that the corporations are going to put money back into the economy, right? And that's a fair assumption. And I think that's probably the right thing to do. I'm a strong advocate, frankly, for a higher corporate tax rate in a lot of ways, right? But we can get into that if you want to. But in certain instances. But the thing is, whenever you start applying the same ideas of corporate tax rates to individuals, because individuals, they have to, ride a much tighter line. They have to balance a checkbook all the time. Corporations have so many loopholes to where they don't necessarily have to do those things, right? And you're taxing their ability to actually compete in an economy whenever you tax their income. Like, you should tax their spending, right? Wouldn't that make more sense? You should tax how they decide to use the money and assuming that they actually go out and use the money. But if you just tax their ability to you tax them before they have the ability to use the money by taxing their income, then you're discouraging people from participating in the economy, which goes against the free market kind of thing we were talking about.
You're kind of cutting them off at the knees. I see.
Yeah,
what you mean.
exactly. So
okay.
anyway,
I'll have to look into that. That's interesting.
Bit of a divergence there, but
no, it's important. I
mean, the income tax
is very
is bad news,
introductory
folks.
for a
It's
lot
bad
of us.
news. Bad news.
Well, that's cool. So that happened. Corporate that's a little weird. Corporate income tax, that was 1909. The first official consistent federal income tax on people like you and me was in 1913, so a little more than 100 years ago. Jeez. But some other things came around in the 1920s and 1930s, and that kind of set in stone this progressive era where we pay a lot of taxes and we get a lot of social benefits and all that jazz. The estate tax, the death tax. So you die and the government says, we haven't taxed you enough. Time for us to take this money from your family after you built it to give it to them and pass down a legacy. Whatever. That's the estate tax. There was the gift tax. And, of course, the wonderful Social Security taxes.
Right. The estate tax is one of the most evil things I think we've ever convoluted as a government.
Absolutely. I think if I don't want to run for office or anything, but if I could, or like if my husband did it, who knows, I would beg him to make that a top issue. Oh,
it has to be. But the thing is, and the reason why they don't, and I think this is so sick, right? The reason why a lot of politicians don't make it a top issue is because it doesn't really necessarily impact a lot of people, right? Like, I'm never going to have to worry, or
it's just morally
for the
wrong.
moment, right?
That's the thing. It's not going to happen to me. I'm not rich, but
it's wrong.
It hurts my soul that we do it.
Yeah, and it actually hurts the Republic in general, because if the people who have, acquired wealth in that way, if they don't have the ability to continue to, build that family and grow that wealth and preserve that legacy, that's a net negative, whatever the opposite of benefit is, a net negative to the Republic, right? And
I don't know, my brain's not working, so I can't
mine's
think of the
not
word
either, right?
But it's just something where, like,
it's
I'm not a
wrong.
millionaire, but something about it hurts, and to know, it just seems immoral. Somebody passed away, a leader of a family passed away, and now the government is coming in to say, hey, you didn't give enough time. And want to know what hurts too? Family farms. It's a whole thing, but I won't get into it. I found some numbers, though. World War I financing, Connor. You want to hear these income tax numbers?
No, but yes.
1%.
Oh, my gosh.
On anything up to $20,000.
Wow.
2% on $20,000 and up. And then I saw the highest percentage was 7% on income of $500,000 and up.
Which, back in World War I days, is that adjusted for inflation, or is that?
I focused more on the percentage.
Yeah, but regardless.
Focus more on this. 7% was the highest level of income tax that they had in 1913.
And they knew that was offensive, so they limited it to a very, very small echelon of people.
I mean, 500,000 back then. That's a lot of. Yeah. So, 2021 marginal tax rate. Do you want to hear that?
I don't even know what they are right now, so I'm about
the smallest is 10%.
Okay. What is that? Like up to $12,000 in
income? Up to $9,500.
Oh, wow.
And this is single filing. Then there was a middle one. Basically, like $86,000 you make a year, up to like $160,000. You pay 24% of your income. A quarter of your income goes to the government now.
That's insane.
And this was all just in 100 years.
Right.
I think one of the big lessons of this podcast is that 100 years is a small amount of time.
Oh, yeah.
And so what I'm worried about is if we really want to be a long-lasting country, we better cut the crap soon because we are exponentially increasing. That's what freaks me out. It's like, guys, this is not a good trend.
Oh, yeah.
Only 100 years has changed, and now average middle-class Americans that make $80,000 are paying a quarter of their money.
Right.
That could pay off debt. That could buy somebody a house. That could build somebody a much better life.
Could allow them to start a family.
If it was spent in a better way than whatever the federal government is doing with that money, like torturing puppies with flies that eat their faces. Thank you, Dr. Fauci. Or, I don't know, funding the creation of COVID-19 in communist China. Then the highest, guess what the highest is? 37% of your income to the federal government.
And they want to make it even higher, right?
If you make more than like $520,000. Yeah, and then the left still, you're not paying your fair share.
Enough, right?
If I pay half of what I'm earning, it's still not fair share.
Yeah, that's insane.
And I know that we can get into the nitty gritty of like the percentages and the numbers and stuff, but I just want you guys to see, only 100 years ago, The lowest amount was 1%. The highest was 7%. Now the highest is 40% of what you make as an American. That's sickening. And again, I don't make $500,000.
Yeah.
But come on, people.
But why would I ever be incentivized to make $500,000? Why should I work that hard, to get up to that income level if I know that's just going to be taken away from me? I mean, you demotivate people from actually engaging in commerce if you do crap like that.
Yeah,
frankly.
And so this is what's interesting to me. I found Publius said something about this, of like the proportion in which we bring in revenue. And he said the ability of a country to pay taxes must always be proportioned in a degree to the quantity of money in circulation and to the celerity with which it circulates. Commerce, contributing to both of these objects, must of necessity render the payment of taxes easier and facilitate the requisite supplies to the treasury. And I'm sorry, but it just doesn't seem really proportionate to take 40% of someone's income.
No, of course it doesn't.
So that really grinds my gears. Again, I'm not rich or anything. I don't make anything near $500,000, but it hurts my soul on behalf of people, on behalf of the principles that we founded this country on, that you should be able to build and grow something.
Right. And then he talks about the money and the quantity of money in circulation. I don't think Hamilton could have ever imagined that we would be in a place in terms of our monetary policy where we're just printing money willy-nilly and saying, oh, well, it's totally funded, right? The $1.9 trillion, infrastructure bill or whatever, it's totally funded.
Yeah.
No, it's not. We're literally, what you would know better than I have, $24 trillion in debt. Is that right? Something like that?
Yeah, quite a lot.
We're quite a lot in debt.
Right now, our GDP is $20.44 trillion.
Yeah. So nothing is funded, right? There's no such thing as funded whenever you don't have any money in the bank. But the solution is just print the money, right? And and like Hamilton would be like, excuse me? You can't do that.
It's such a good example. Like when we talked about the war stuff with the previous papers, every topic that you've been on to discuss, it's just another example of, I don't know if our founders really anticipated.
Of course
I think
not.
They anticipated tyrants. They anticipated people that would be power hungry. But did they anticipate multiple generations of leaders and just of citizens, of a population that was so ignorant and so unaware and so uncaring about these things?
Right.
Because at the time, this was the people of America were a generation that fought a revolutionary war against a monarchy and said, we're going to build a damn country rooted in freedom.
They did.
And a lot of the language in the Federalist Papers, in the founding documents, is basically, it comes with an assumption almost by the founders, maybe a naive assumption, that Americans would stay that way in their mindset because we were special and we were put on this country by providence, by the hand of God. And look at us now. Like you said, in so much debt, printing money, and nobody seems to be giving a crap.
Right.
I would also say, I know we're conservatives. I can't tell you how many times I've helped to get candidates and all that stuff, and they promise all these things. When you look, I don't know about you, but like when I was coming up in like AP Gov and high school history class and all these classes on government and stuff, I just kind of assumed that the massive debt that we're in and the situations of inflation and all this stuff, I just assumed, well, that must have always been a problem.
Right. That's
always been the case.
Yeah.
But then as I started to grow up and I'm turning like 24, I think it was like last year. I'm 24 now and I've kind of come full circle and I'm like, wait a second.
Yeah.
Now that I'm out of the school era where I'm just hearing what the teachers are saying, I'm looking at the timeline and it's really just this small amount of decades where conservative leaders as well completely abandoned principles of financial conservatism.
Right.
And what it means to actually stick to a budget, not put yourself in trillions of dollars of debt, and not fund these insane programs.
Yeah.
I just thought it was something that we've always dealt with as a country. I just kind of assumed because I was raised in it.
Yeah.
You were raised in it.
I was.
To find out that this is all a new concept and that it's really just been the last couple decades of conservative leaders that just stopped giving a crap,
I mean, the
blows my mind.
The budget was balanced under Clinton. I think the year I was born, 96, we had a zero deficit. We had a balanced budget, right?
Yeah.
And why are we not fighting for that every single year? I don't know. What happened was we get into 2001, 9/11, as I always say, changed everything, right?
Yeah.
And next thing you know, we start doing all of these incredible things in terms of funding the defense, all in the name of national security, just like we did with the Patriot Act, right? And it's like, well, we have to spend $24 trillion, of course, because we have to go defeat, the Taliban. Look where that got us. And then we just become flippant with it. We leave $85 billion worth of equipment in Afghanistan. Regardless, I digress. But yeah, I mean, it's just a total abandoning of these policies. And what conservatives more often than not have done in Congress, whenever these things come up, they always say, well, how are we going to pay for it, right? They're going to say, well, we can't afford that. Well, we all know we can't afford it, right? I think this is where I might pay for it. I think this is where I might break from you, though, right?
Yeah.
And this is probably a more pessimistic view, which I'm, known to have around here, I guess. But who knows, right? But here's the thing. Is if the left is going to embrace this kind of idea of modern monetary theory, right?
Yeah.
Then conservatives need to start taking the same approach and saying, well, we're not going to argue with you on the merits of how are we going to pay for it, because for two reasons. One is Americans are politically numb to it. They couldn't give a crap less. Sadly, that's the truth, right?
Well, it's so confusing. Like, if
of course
you
it's
said modern
confusing.
monetary theory to most people, they'd be like, what?
Well, and then the question of the debt versus the deficit and how does that actually impact most Americans? And most Americans talk about the Social Security tax, and they're like, well, I'm not going to touch Social Security until I'm 65, so why do I care? So they don't pay attention to it, right? But the thing is, like, how are we going to pay for it? Well, okay, you've sat by and watched as we, stomached $1.9 trillion here, $4 trillion here, $7 trillion here. The American people are now used to dealing in the trillions, which A, is terrifying. Yeah. B, we need to stop, right? Yeah. At some point, right? But C, the thing is, they don't understand what you're talking about, right? So instead of saying how we're going to pay for it, we need to start saying, well, no, this is fundamentally a bad idea. And I'm not going to reject it based on its cost. I'm going to reject it based on its merits.
Ooh.
And it's such a boogeyman that the left has on us right now. And we need to take away their tool, this power that they have over us.
What is it?
Right? The power that they have over us is that we need to start proposing bold ideas to actually make America a better place. Mm-hmm. And our bold ideas, much different than their bold ideas, are rooted in objective goods and truths and moral imperatives, like starting a larger family, right? And sustaining, American values through generational wealth. So, but the problem is we can't do that because it costs money. That's a reality that we have to deal with. Things like that costs money.
For me, it's like, is this where you think we're going to break?
Yeah, I think this is where we're going to break because
spend your money on?
Look, if I get to pull the levers of the federal government, and I get to start proposing policy, and I don't have to worry about the left coming at me and saying, "Well, how are you going to pay for it? You're not a fiscal conservative." Blah, blah, blah. Okay, maybe I'm not, right?
Yeah.
We should make it easier in America to start a family, right? So if you are a married person, you have a wife, you have a husband, and you've been married for, let's say, 2 years, then you become eligible to get $10,000 in tax credits per child that you have. After your fourth child, the tax credits go up to $15,000, right? And you can use this to finance the college if you want. I probably wouldn't suggest that.
So when you say tax credits, do you mean like, you don't mean checks? You just mean like you don't have to pay this money in taxes?
You don't have to pay this money in taxes. Maybe we have a conversation about checks though, right? Maybe we have a conversation about these things.
So for me, I'm just such a radical and very anti-government that I'm like, no, I don't want people to get checks. But I totally would say like, oh, you should be able to spend your money in other ways. Like for the COVID stuff, I really struggled with like the stimulus checks because at first I'm like, no, stop giving people checks. But then half of me was like, give us our damn money back.
Well, yeah,
like,
exactly.
You know what? Just give it back. You're right. I don't want you to have it in the first place. So I struggle with that because I'm like very anti-government now.
Right.
But I understand it serves a basic purpose. I totally think policy should be more solutions oriented for conservatives, and we should say we don't support your policy not because we can't pay for it, but because it's terrible and it would harm this country.
Well, yeah.
I don't know why people don't say that more often, so I totally agree with you on that.
Well, but
I'm up for options. Honestly, Connor, I don't know. This is a little radical, and it's more like cultural instead of the freedom paper stuff, but like I don't even know how, like people say, well, we need to fund daycare centers. We need to fund this so that women can go to the workplace and still have a family and still have kids. I'm like, why are we trying to shove women into the workplace to solve the family problem and have other people raise our kids when in reality maybe we should look at other options. So that's where I'm like,
I'm not going to fund universal pre-K. That's a terrible idea,
well,
right?
Exactly. So
that's what
why
they want
it's
to
like
do.
I'm totally for making policies that encourage family making and stuff, but the way that they're putting it, it's like what? So mom and dad can go be worker bees, and we can have other people raise our kids funded by the state? No thanks.
No, that's a terrible idea. But the thing is like...
And again, they're saying it's general welfare.
No, it's not. But yeah, of course, that's what they're saying, right? It's general welfare and yada, 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 yada. But the thing is, it's all rooted in lies. And all that they want to actually do is take more control over your life. And all that we're saying is that we should use the tools of government to take back control over our life, right?
Yeah.
And government should make that more easy. And so if we have power, we should be willing to do that, right? And how do you pay for it? Well, you tax the corporations more. Tax Amazon more, right? Start levying tariffs on trade coming in from China, right? People who want to destroy us. Like start generating revenue without breaking the backs of the American middle class and allow the American middle class to actually grow for once, right?
Yeah.
Because like we say all the time, and this is where Elizabeth Warren and I agree ostensibly, right? You should be able to raise a family in America on a single income, right? The mom should be able to stay home and not have to go to work if that's what she wants to do.
I think that's one of my biggest, like if I don't know about you, if I could come up with like one of the things that I want to achieve in my life or like a core focus on something, I'm a big like anti-communism person. I love history of the 20th century and making sure young people understand it. It's just my passion.
Right.
But one of them would probably be to make it so that you can raise a family in America on a single income.
Yeah, there's no excuse why you shouldn't be able to.
It's a shame that you can't in many areas, but it's also choices of what kind of choices are you making? Where are you living and stuff like that? So that's a whole situation, but I totally agree with you on a lot of that. And I think it's important for us to take these concepts when the left is using the language of the Federalist paper and they're using the language of the Constitution to say that this is why we need to be funding all of these programs. It's time for us to get back to it and say no. And when we talk about like, tax the corporations more or whatever, I'm like, you know what? We would have a lot more money to operate with without even raising taxes if we cut a ton of stuff out that they're currently saying is for the general welfare.
Right.
Like I would take an axe to a huge portion of the federal government if I was given the kind of power to do so, or if I was given an option. Sometimes I think of like making a little map.
Yeah.
And like saying, this is what I would do. I kind of want to make it like an online game.
That'd be fun.
What would you cut out? We should do that.
Yeah. That's a phenomenal idea, right?
Like, what would you get rid of? I got some things. Because they say it's for the general welfare. I say, no, it should be states. So I'm very radical, and I understand if some people out there haven't heard this kind of stuff before, and this is a little much for you. But I am invested in this every single day, and I'm telling you guys, the federal government shouldn't have their hands in half of the crap that they do right now. And we don't even have to talk about tax raises or anything like that. We would solve a lot of problems if we took an axe to some things.
Yeah. We always say on
this is one of my favorite episodes.
Right.
I'm like, dang.
You're totally right. But we always say on the Charlie Kirk Show, we want a small but strong government, right?
Well, that's what it was intended by the Federalists.
Exactly.
So that's the whole thing. But what went wrong? Was it stuff like this with too general of language?
Well, no. What it was that you get. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm interested.
No, what it was that you get people hooked on government, right? And then government becomes the patriarch of the family, right? Which is not what the founders ever intended. Their assumption was that Americans would be far too fearful of the federal government to ever embrace them as an option, which could then eventually be abused.
Exactly.
And we saw that was not the case once the Depression hit. FDR took over, and then LBJ took and expanded it vastly, right? And that's how we get in the situation we're in today with the Great Society program, which was just a total disaster, right? And that was an attempt by government to kind of do what I'm saying, right? Retool things to increase prosperity among individuals and yada, yada, yada. But like I was saying, their ideas weren't rooted in the objective goods. Theirs were rooted in God knows what, actually, right? I think really bad political motivations, if you want my opinion. But instead of saying, we're going to pay you to keep a father in a home, they said, we're going to pay you to take a father out of a home. Yeah. And then you just have bedlam, right? So that's how we got there.
It really hurts me.
That's how we got there. And that's why you can't cut a lot of these things, right? Because then the politics come in and the communication arm of the left comes in and they says, well, you're a heartless, soulless, cold bigot who hates black people. Yep. Because you want to cut, federal entitlement spending.
Actually, speaking of that, that's exactly what they say. There was something, I think it was about universal pre-K. It might have actually been the same thread where they referenced the general welfare quote. And sorry, I don't know why I keep slurring my words. I don't know. I'm pretty energized.
It's a Monday.
Maybe I had too much caffeine. I don't know. I'm jazzed, and this is a good conversation. But in this, I think it was the same situation where they were referencing. I think it was universal pre-K. They were saying it's for the general welfare. They also followed it up, and this was from a liberal operative, whatever. And he said, "Shove it through.
Yeah,
shove this through. I don't care if we're going to be able to pay for it or what will happen." And he said, "Let's be ruthless because it's going to be 10 times harder for those evil conservatives to take it away from someone than it is for us to get it into their hands."
That's exactly
right.
They
will never be able to remove it from someone's life if we get people attached to it. That was disgusting. Yeah. You're saying you want to make someone reliant on a system and then make it 10 times harder for us to remove it because we know that that's the best thing for them. It was just this sick way. And he's
said the quiet part
you
out
just
loud.
Tweeted that publicly.
Yeah.
You sicko.
You really just said that.
I used to think people are going to think I'm crazy if I say this, and I would try and explain this is what they're doing, and it's why our job is so much harder. It's why we have to fight so hard, because if the Green New Deal gets passed, That's never going away. And so that's why we have to prevent things. It's why
Right.
we say, like, hold the line.
Right.
It's because they're pushing for these radical things that they know
Right.
are never going to disappear once they get it passed. So our job is 10 times harder to take something that is feel good away from someone, but now they're just openly tweeting about it. That's the radical left. The Overton window shifted so much.
Yeah, exactly.
Now that's the modern day liberal.
Well, yeah, exactly. And that's what it's all about. It's like they're saying, hey, we want to give you an option to, go out and enjoy your life more. We want to give you free daycare. We want to give you all these things that might make your life easier, ostensibly. We know that that's a lie, right? But it sounds nice. And the only conservative response for the past 20 years was, well, that'll cost too much, right? And so that's why we have to start, upping our messaging, playing more effective defense, which means really going on offense against what they're saying.
Yeah.
Like, start putting these people on defense.
Yeah.
Right? Make them defend these like really, really, really horrible ideas to the wide general population because they're unable to do so, right? Tell AOC to go sell her idea of an all-electric vehicle fleet, to the, iron workers or the steel workers, the auto manufacturers in Detroit, right? Because she's not going to. She never will. She's too scared. They don't want to hear it. But it's terrifying actually, and that's what they did with Obamacare. And now every single policy, every single election year in America is dominated by conversations over healthcare, and that the mean, right party, the mean, conservative party, is going to come and they're going to take away your grandma's healthcare, right? Yeah. Because we just let them ram it through, and that's exactly what they did. They rammed it through. And so we have to start doing the same thing.
Well, not only that, but then we're like, repeal, replace.
No.
And then what did they do?
It's so pathetic, and people are so upset with the right, and rightfully so, because when the left has the mindset like, I don't care, we're going to ram it through because we know that it's good for the people and it's going to make them dependent on us, blah, 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 right? Whenever they are given the opportunity to do something that they want to get done, they do it, right? Whenever we're put in power, whenever the right's put in power, what do we do whenever we have all three branches of government? The first thing we do, we cut corporate tax rates for Facebook and Google and YouTube and Twitter, right? And all these things. Amazon. And the American people are like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Like, what about me?
What is that?
You just cut the richest man's taxes, the richest man in the world's taxes, and I'm over here, getting shafted. Like, what? How do I benefit from electing you? Because you're spineless and you're a coward.
Yeah.
And I don't know. We got to do something about it. We got to figure it out.
Well, I saw we have a little time.
Yeah.
I was at Mar-a-Lago. We had the fundraiser for Turning Point.
Right.
And basically they had like all the show hosts there sitting at tables with people that cared about our stuff. So I got like a whole table of history nerds. Basically.
That's exciting. I love that.
So it was really cool. And so I was telling them about it, and I've never been surrounded by people that were like, whoa, like a whole table of people that enjoyed that and knew what the Federalist Papers was and everything. Because usually I have to like explain it.
Yeah.
And instead all I had to say was like, yeah, it's on the ratification debate. And they were like, can I come on? And I was like, yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would love that. And so it was just really exciting.
Yeah.
And one of them we were talking about, because the left says everything is for the general welfare, everything is for saving lives or whatever, they do this very drastic language. They've made it very clear that they intend to pack the court, that they intend to get rid of the filibuster, they want to get rid of the Electoral College, they want to pass the Green New Deal, and they will do it as soon as they get the majority.
Right.
They've made that very clear. They do it every time. We were kind of game planning of like, if you look at the founding documents, if you look at the Federalist Papers, what are they telling us to do? And like, what were the powers given to the people in this situation? And we were looking at stuff. They were talking about a state convention to ratify another amendment. Right. And one of those could potentially be, an option would be just game playing. Like, like maybe this might work. They said something about a constitutional amendment to make it strictly 9 Supreme Court judges. Sure. Because what they would first do, and they were explaining it to me, these were like constitutional lawyers from D.C. Yeah. One was for 20 years a lawyer for the House of Representatives. Like these, they were not Connor and Morgan, okay? Right. Like reading it after them talking about it. And so I'm listening to them, like taking notes, like, oh my gosh, okay, I got to tell Connor. And I'm all excited. And so they're saying, if we focused first on something that everybody could get behind, and apparently the findings, they did a bunch of polls around the country, and like a ton of people said that they would support a the ratifying of an amendment like this to make it strictly 9 judges. And it's like an oddly large amount of people that would support it compared to other random initiatives. Yeah. So it was like, oh, interesting. That was the first thing. But it was because they would try and do the filibuster, Electoral College, all their other things, and they know that it would be challenged. And the only way they can make sure it long lasts is if they can pack the court and get the court to support it. And so if you do the Supreme Court protection,
cut them off
you
at the
might
knees.
be able to stop them with the process provided by the founders. And that's why somebody asked me, I was so nervous, Connor. I'm the Freedom Papers girl, right? And so I had just told all these really fancy people that I do a podcast on this.
Right.
And somebody had asked me, so Morgan, what is the one thing about the U.S. Constitution that sets us apart from every other attempt at a republic in world history? And I was like, I know this. Oh, God. And I'm like, don't disappoint Turning Point, because like we're at the fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago and everything.
Right.
And I'm like, well, now's not the time to be dumb. And so I was like, well, I mean, I've got to say it must be something about the checks and balances. That was like such a big lesson of this, is the checks on power, I would say. And they said, yes, but what is it? And it was the fact that states could come together, a certain amount of states can come together and create a constitutional amendment.
Right.
And so they were like, that was the last ditch thing that they provided in case things got horrible.
Right.
If enough people get pissed off enough, we could get enough public support. This is like, last chance.
Yeah.
If enough people feel this way and understand the crucialness of it, you could actually save everything.
Oh, totally.
Like, that's the one thing that sets us apart from every other country in history. So I was like, whoa.
Of course.
So I want to look into it, and I feel like we should keep everybody updated as we look into the opportunities and stuff, because as soon as they get majority again, Connor, we will have a fight of our lifetime.
I certainly hope so.
Because
Assuming
we're
learn
never
how to
going to...
fight.
This is the thing. Maybe conservatives win in 2022.
Yeah.
Maybe we do it again in 2024. But there is nothing stopping the left from one day achieving majority again.
No, yeah.
That is inevitable, because we're America. We're a two-party system.
Right.
I would love it if we could continually win, but it's just not the case. And so we need to prepare for that day and look to what our founders said on how to prevent radical policy.
Right.
So that was something, and I know we just totally delineated, but speaking of what you had kind of mentioned before we went on our little tangent, you had said that the government is replacing fathers. The government is replacing the private economy. The government is impeding in ways that the Federalist did not anticipate. And I was looking at the GDP, now $20 trillion, and producer Angelo back there, he's amazing, and he also kind of reads every paper, and then he provides his insight, because we want to make sure we cover everything, and it's just so sweet that he does it. So producer Angelo, he was showing me, and right now, 18% of the average taxed, if you look at like over the last 20 years, the 18% is like the average amount taxed of Americans. If you look at 18% of $20 trillion, it's $3.769 trillion. And to think that the government is operating with that kind of money, and it hurts my soul a little bit, but it's right to that testament of, I don't know if these guys really anticipated that kind of money being pushed around.
No. I mean, obviously they didn't. And it's just, that's such a basic point, but it's so incredibly important, because at the end of the day, what belies the amount of money that we're now pushing around is the massive expansion and growth of the federal government, which necessitates that much money to fund it, right? Mm-hmm. And we should be a small government that's easy to fund. We don't need to fund the salaries of career bureaucrats the way that we do, right? The most entrenched thing in the entire world is a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C., and they have a pension, and they have a salary that's pretty outrageous.
And it's
a lot of
impossible to
benefits,
fire them.
and it's impossible to fire them. So they're literally there, and we just keep creating more and more and more and more of them, and more agencies and more buildings and all these things. And then, that's just one tiny sliver of it. Yeah. But in order for the government to work, the threat of a government shutdown becomes scarier and scarier, because the left keeps using the fear tactics of saying, well, if you shut down the government, then you're going to imperil the livelihood of, some egregious number of families.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
they shouldn't be employed.
God, I hate that you're doing this to me, because I don't want to do that to a family. But why are they there in the first place?
Well, and honestly, Conrad, you get a check after.
Yeah, exactly. It's such baloney,
and you,
right?
are told to stay home.
Right.
Or if there's not money in the coffer, guess what? You're not getting paid, because you're a private business.
Right.
But the government, they just have to wait. Like my dad.
They're going to take care of them.
So he's in the National Guard and reserves now. But when he was full time in the Guard doing all that stuff, he's an auditor, and maybe the government shuts down, you get the money as soon as they open back up. It's disgusting.
And they're good for it, right?
And when you're touching on something so important to me, I'm against socialism because it builds reliance. You're reliant on the government, and then you do whatever they tell you to do in exchange for the services or the money or the goods that they're providing. And I know a lot of military guys. I don't know if you talk to anybody, but a lot of them were like, I'm conflicted, because all my life I thought I was, serving the United States of America, the people, the classic.
Right.
I mean, I'm very pro-military in the sense that, supporting our troops and stuff. My dad's a colonel. But they're reaching this point of, I never saw it as like, wow, I'm a government employee, fully reliant on the government for my stuff, and it
Totally.
goes against my conservative values. And it kind of was like a really hard thing for them to come to.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, all the military families that are conservative with all this mandate stuff, all of these things that are coming out, they're like, I never saw myself in that light,
Yeah.
but now I'm on the same peg as a bureaucrat.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm put in that same boat, and I feel bad for them because they've probably given so much.
Oh, yeah.
And now they're just treated as another bureaucrat.
Yeah, there's this sort of Damocles now hanging over their head of whether or not they're going to get the government created to, experiment on them or whatever, right? So it's really, really evil what they're doing, and they expect a lot of the bureaucrats in the agencies to just comply like lemmings, but I think they're finding a lot more resistance among our troops, which naturally so. I hope that our troops are fighters like that. So Lord knows that we're praying for them, but
Right?
it's a terrible time. And
It's disgusting.
at the end of the day, we do need to shrink government, but in the meantime, until we can start actually, doing something good about it,
We should act.
we should act. We
Well,
should
and there's
use the
ways
levers
to
of power.
act. This is the thing. Did you see? So, for example, some big tech companies have been banning political candidates.
Right.
I know, like Anna Paulina Luna, I think she was censored or restricted or deleted from Twitter or something.
Yeah.
She was running for Congress in Florida, and she's my friend, and she's really cool. So she's in Florida, and she's trying to reach people to run, and she deserves a platform just like any other candidate. And so Ron DeSantis, this is an example of like something that I would support.
Yeah.
That's like government action. He
Right.
said we're going to find companies that remove public or political candidates
Exactly.
from our platform,
Exactly.
from their platforms, because it's not right. The people deserve to see what all political candidates say, and like that's the kind of stuff where I'm like, yeah, maybe we should go big ballin' in this kind
Yeah,
of stuff. Maybe we
absolutely.
should put our foot down and say, we don't believe in massively taxing people or oppressing people, but we will use government to
Sure.
stand up for people.
Small but strong.
I believe in government. I believe in the utility of it in many ways.
Well, and that's
so
what our
the
founders
kind
would
of
want us to
action
do
we need.
too, right? Our founders would expect that we would support something like that.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't expect that we would be so cowardly to do like what some governors up in the Dakotas did, during the pandemic. And they say, well, we can't step in, right, and interfere with the workings of a private business because they're a private business. And we don't want government stepping on the toes of private industry, right?
Yeah.
Because that's not the conservative thing to do. But it completely ignores the fact that this private industry and this private business is firing employees of the state that you're supposed to govern, right? And it's such a milquetoast BS excuse
It is.
from someone hiding behind principle while real people suffer.
Yeah, did I tell you about I spoke at Wichita State University in Kansas, and a politician came up to me when I was there, and he was very nice, and he introduced himself, and he said, I'm in the house here. It was the State House. I don't know if maybe it was called like something else there, but
Sure.
he was in the State House, and he's explaining what he does, and he's going to fight back and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, awesome. He's super young and exciting. And what happened later is some conservative guys, it was really cool because they had like the GOP, the older people came to the student event and
Yeah.
supported them. So it was like a mix of parents of the GOP from the area, of all these cool people, and then students from campus. So they did a really great job of making it a community event. They come up to me and they say, that guy that you were talking to, he probably schmoozed you, right? And I was like, yeah, he seems great. And it turns out he's one of the many in the state that were giving the excuse of like, well, we can't do anything against Biden's mandates, and we can't make any legislation or do anything because there's nothing to fight against yet. It's just what he said. He hasn't made actual an order and passed it down. The people in Kansas, the Republicans, the conservatives, they're saying, well, Joe Biden hasn't technically made the rule yet, and this was before ASHA announced that they were giving the deadline and stuff, and they were like, so there's nothing for us to fight yet because it was just what he said. And I said, why are you waiting to get attacked when you could go on the offensive and make a legislation that says you are not allowed to require vaccination mandates in our state the way Ron DeSantis is? But instead they're just being pansies saying, well, we're just waiting to be attacked, and then we'll try and find some bill that like kind of stands up against it but doesn't really, and then we're still going to let people get fired. It's like we can be conservatives without letting the left have every action via the arm of the government is what I think.
You know what's actually really interesting?
What?
So if you look at the words that define our political, kind of ideologies, our sides, right?
Yeah.
They're both based on two words, right? One is liberal, one is conservative. The root of conservative is to conserve, right? That's an active verb, right? It's something that you must actively be engaged in. If there's a fire over here and this paper's sitting here and I care about this paper, then I have to actively pick it up and protect it from the fire, or actively get up and go and defend against the fire, right? The other one, right, liberal, that comes from the word liberate, or no, it comes from the word liberty. Sorry, it comes from the word liberty. The other one, liberal, it comes from the word liberty. That's more of a passive idea. It's just this idea that, you do possess this freedom. You don't have to act on it if you don't want to, right? So conservatives get really confused all the time when it comes to like what our ideology actually means. It's something you have to fight for every single damn day, right? Because it's something that matters. Conservatism implies that you're protecting something that matters, that you have to care about it, that you have to give two about it, right? You have to give a crap about it. This whole idea of liberalism, whatever, it's totally just like a free-for-all. It's just whatever.
It's not the classical liberalism.
It doesn't require anything.
That was intended.
Right, no, of course not. And so if we lose sight of the fact that, we actually need to be doing something, we need to be the man in the arena party, the woman in the arena party, right, to be equitable.
Thanks, Connor. You don't have to do that with me.
Of course. Yeah, then we're going to lose the country, right? Because it's on us at the end of the day. And Charlie says this all the time, and I think it's powerful, right? It's people would come up to him all the time, and they'd say, hey, man, how's it going out there, right? How's it going out there in the fight? And Charlie would be like, the hell do you mean, right? What am I, like a football player or like, a race car driver or something? Why aren't you out there in the fight? Why don't you know how it's going out there? You should be in there with me, right? And every single American needs to be involved in this. Because at the end of the day, if we keep letting these things pass, if we keep letting this massive encroachment on our individual liberties in the name of taxation, or all of this stuff, like this open free trade with China and globalization and all the things that they warn about that we should be using to our benefit in Federalist 12. Federalist 12.
How dare you?
I know, excuse me. Then, we're going to end up losing the Republicans. It's going to be really, really scary and really dangerous. And what was it all for then? So
I agree. No, I'm glad that Charlie says that because I like to say freedom is a lifestyle.
Yeah, it is.
It's a day-to-day behavior of yourself, your family, and what you do in your community and for your country.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's you have to be active in it. People make fun of us because they're like, "What are you conserving? America wasn't that great to begin with. Like, why are you trying to conserve it?" And it's like, okay, I didn't realize we would have to have this conversation. But you're right, because a lot of people call themselves conservatives and they're not. No. And so I like that we're reinvigorating it. Let's wrap this up because we got super far off, but obviously into a great conversation.
I tried to bring it back there. It was a little ham-handed, but I tried.
Oh, you did. So just to wrap it up, you guys, this again was about the state, the government taxing its people, bringing in revenue. And first of all, this section of the Federalist Papers was all about why it's better as a union. I just want to bring in two last quotes. Publius said, "If, on the contrary, there be but one government pervading all the states, there will be, as to the principal part of our commerce, but one side to guard from enemies like Europe and the rest of them and anybody that wants to trade with us." And he said it would be the Atlantic coast. Mm-hmm. So instead of a bunch of little states all on the side that Europe and all of our foreign adversaries or even our allies would have to deal with, it's just one big America, and we're going to be able to advocate for ourselves, and especially in trade and commerce, in a stronger way. So that was like a very basic point that he made at the end. And then he also wrapped it up and said, "Here also we should preserve by union an advantage which nature holds on to us, and which would be relinquished by separation. It is there evident that one national government would be able at much less expense to extend the duties on imports by comparison further than would be practicable to the states separately or to any partial confederacies." And so again, this was more so finishing up by talking about how it's more efficient when we're all dealing with commerce and with trade and with the expansion of the economy as one strong union, which is the core principle and goal of the Federalist Papers. So that's a good situation for us to end on. My brain hurts from thinking so much after this. Connor, thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Oh my goodness. I can't believe that was a wild conversation. But you guys, thanks for listening to this. I hope that it gave you some historical context of commerce and what tax was going to look like in the founders' eyes and how we've transitioned, especially over the 20th century. Now we're taxed quite a lot, almost 40% of our income. It's kind of insane if you ask me, but it's important for us to understand what they intended and what we're at now so that we can fix it and get back to the core principles of the Constitution. I don't think the Constitution's failing. I think people have forgotten it and abandoned it, and if we get right back to it, we'll be in a good place to save this republic. So Connor, thanks for coming, and thank you guys for listening. Remember to follow @Freedom Papers Podcast on Instagram. I'll see you later. See you next time.